Number 5.
The hospital I worked at had its mental health facility detached from the main building. To get to it, you have to walk down the hill from the main building. The outbuilding it's in is 2 stories. The upper part is for officers and the lower is the patient area. We have 2 sections, A and B. Section A is for the more severe cases of mental illness, and Section B is for the more mild forms, including people who have made suicide attempts. Every time I was sent down there, I worked in Section A. The first part of the procedures for the day was getting the keys from the security guards. Every door in the facility was to remain closed and locked so the patients couldn't escape. If you needed to leave and a door was blocked by a patient or they were nearby enough that they could potentially slip out with you, you had to find another way around or wait for them to leave. This happened a few times to me, but it was never really much of a problem. The second thing about the procedures that made this a difficult place to work was how we cleaned the rooms. We had to take our housekeeping cart and wheel it into the doorway to block the patients from coming in while we worked. While we were cleaning, we had to keep an eye on our carts to make sure patients didn't come up and pull things out of them. A few years before, a patient actually tried to drink some of the cleaning agents off of another housekeeper's cart. The third procedure, it dealt with if a patient cornered you or attacked you. This was a very rare occurrence, but had happened in the past. As we were not allowed to defend ourselves if such an event happened, we would have to yell for a security guard, a doctor, or a nurse. If that didn't work, we would have to try and talk the patient down ourselves, or find a way to escape from them without using violence. I was thankfully never attacked, but working there was unsettling, and one of the most difficult things I've had to do to date. My first week working down there was a woman who refused to put her clothes on. They had her locked in the solitary confinement for 3 days because of it. The confinement rooms were down a small hallway with large glass doors. They would take unruly patients in there and strap them down to these padded reclining chairs until whatever problem they had created was resolved. They had cameras in the room to monitor the patients, but due to the nudity of the woman, they kept a sticky note over the screen and would lift it up every once in a while to see how she was doing. But the worst patient for me, personally, was there for the entire time I worked down there. He would talk to himself, which was normal for most of the patients. He usually sat in the common area, and oftentimes when I had to go near him, I was behind the chair he was sitting in, cleaning, and he was facing an empty chair talking to nobody in particular. And all of a sudden, he would let out this strained, loud laugh and scream at the chair,
"Shut up, pig!"
And then he just relaxed again. I hurried away, as the situation freaked me out. Another day, this same man was humming to himself. It was a Christian song, like one learned in Sunday school. He was laying down, and then he just went stiff as a board, and he started screaming. I was mopping in the area again, and it startled me. I glanced at him, and he continued to yell. I heard him say,
"Stop it, Satan!"
before I left the area. I was never hurt, attacked, or cornered by any of the patients, thank God for that. But working in that place was spooky, and I was grateful when my boss finally told me I would never have to work down there ever again.
Number 4.
This happened a few months ago. I was severely ill, seeing doctors and counsellors about my mental health state. I suffered with depression and deep cutting. I was nowhere near happy in life. Early hours in the morning, at around 2 a.m, when everyone was asleep, I climbed out of the house and around to the front, making sure not to awaken my parents and my 2 dogs, Arthur and Tyson. It was around Christmas time, and living in England, our snow always came late. But due to feeling suicidal at the time, I ran down our long deserted road, which looked like an airport runway. I ran to a near bridge, having the intention to jump and end it all. But after reaching the bridge and climbing over the railings, near slipping due to all the railings being iced up, I looked down to see nothing but a 100-foot drop. At this moment in time, my parents had noticed me missing, and after checking on me, I wasn't there, so she reported me missing and told the police everything about my illness and what I was suffering at the time. I was admitted to a mental health unit later that night in Nottingham. I was placed on a Section 3, so I couldn't leave the building until 6 months. so I was already angry that I didn't jump at the time, and I had to stay in a hospital ward with 11 more ill patients. After being walked down the corridor to my room, I attempted to run, even though I knew that the unit was a lockdown building with little to run to. Well, I finally got to sleep after having 2 members of staff watching me. A few days prior, I was put on medication which had a side effect of weird dreams and nightmares. I had a fucked up dream that I was slicing my own body up with a meat knife, almost like I was another person with no care about anyone. After finally being morning, although a little shaken, I thought nothing of the dream. So I got out of bed, walked to the room where all the medication is and where our blood pressure was taken. Sitting there, waiting for my turn, Dane, one of the patients, walked up to me and said the following words that made my blood turn cold.
I like the butcher knife. Try a sword next time.
I answered,
Okay.
thinking he was making some sort of joke that I didn't get. After he walked and sat on the chair across from me, he gave me this weird clown look. I felt like being sick. He walked back down to his room and came back with a piece of paper a moment later, which he placed on the seat next to me. He said to me,
It's for you. Sleep well.
I opened it up to see a man sliced open, with another man laughing with a big butcher knife in his hand. The staff around me automatically took the paper and placed it in their pocket. I just thought that he was ill, so I tried to forget about it that night, but I woke up needing the toilet. I told the staff and they took me down as I wasn't allowed in a room alone in case I tried the worst. I opened the door, only to fall to the floor, crying, seeing Dane. He had cut his throat with a razor. The staff immediately pulled their pin. It was a tag, and when they tugged it, it set off an alarm to all the staff that they needed help ASAP. They picked him up and tried to help him whilst he laid there, lifeless. His stuff was being packed in the morning. He was either moving to a more secure ward, or he had passed on. I never asked, I just cried, remembering what I witnessed that night. A few months after, though, he was admitted again. Miraculously, he had survived that night. Again, he knocked on my door.
Dane?
I said, shocked.
I thought that you were past? No, apparently I was lucky.
He then whispered to me the following words.
You made me do this. You will die and pay.
He gave me that same fucked up clown-like smile. Then he walked off into his old room. I fell asleep uneasily that night. But I was awoken to him trying to strangle me. I was coughing up spit trying to get some air. He was laughing, saying the words,
You made me do it. You take him with you.
I was freaking out, gasping for air. But eventually, through the struggle, some of the nurses eventually came in and took him off of me. He was taken away, and I never heard about him again. I didn't talk to another patient for 4 months, and then I was discharged. I have hoped every night since that day that Dane got better. I work hard on my mental health now. I'm at the gym 6 days a week, and I work. I'm living a pretty good life now, but what happened in that unit still haunts me, and I hope I never see or run into him again.
Number 3.
This is a story about how I found myself trapped in a mental hospital over 1,100 miles away from my home. It's a long, complicated story, so please bear with me. During my first semester of college, I stayed in the campus dorms with one roommate. I had left my home in the southern United States and traveled west to Arizona. My roommate was a small, quiet guy with long stringy hair covering his face. For now, I'll call him Chase. At first, we appeared to be interested in the same things, and I was optimistic that we would be good friends. As time went on, his pessimistic attitude began to show though. I should have expected to be out of place at the school, being a gay 18 artist in a school mostly of heterosexual male programmers and nerds. But out of place doesn't begin to describe how the other students saw me. My friendliness and optimism were perceived by other students as ignorant. My roommate especially saw my attitude towards life and people as blissful ignorance. It was probably for this reason that Chase started to become increasingly bitter and aggressive towards me. He began telling me I deserved to be set on fire for my taste in movies, my computer preferences, and other petty things. As he showered one day, I had noticed files left open on his computer which involved drawn comics of father-child pornography. I know, I'm pretty nosy. Anyway, I kept my discovery to myself at the time. Honestly, I didn't know what to do with my newfound perspective on my roommate. Still, his attraction to the idea of pedophilia and incest made me extremely uncomfortable. During one of his unpredictable snaps towards me, I let slip in front of our friends the content I had seen. He appeared disturbed by my audacity to snitch on him in front of other people, and after a few days, he moved out of the dorms. At first, I didn't pay much attention to him and his bad-mouthing me. That is, until an upperclassman I'll call Jeff entered my life. Jeff was a tall, thin guy who I'd often see rolling around on campus on rollerblades. We chatted a bit in passing from time to time about rollerblading and Arizona, even though I knew he was a friend of Chase's. I initially thought he was pretty harmless. I wasn't about to judge others based on the company they keep. This was my second big mistake. About a week into my second semester of college, I began to notice Jeff in the student dorms more often, even though he didn't live there and would have needed a key to get in. Eventually, he began grabbing me in public, and on one occasion, pinned me against a wall and began pressing himself against me. In many instances, I was caught too off guard to tell him to piss off. It was humiliating. Jeff began to follow me more as time passed, and Chase would often brag about these pranks he convinced Jeff to pull on me. As the slight annoyance began to evolve into full-on sexual harassment, I noticed that Chase would often appear after Jeff had finished harassing me. The final straw for me was an occasion in which I was working in the school's computer lab. There was a fair amount of people around, so I hadn't expected Jeff and Chase to show up and bully me. Jeff approached me, interrupting my conversation with another student in order to forcibly grab my thigh and begin moaning and laughing. At least before, his creepy teasing had been fairly private, but now, he had the entire room's attention. I tried to make a joke to hide my humiliation.
Okay, that's enough of that. Go find someone else to be your human stress ball.
I gave a fake laugh. In reaction to this, he forcefully grabbed at my crotch and quickly licked my face like an excited dog. I managed to push him off and stand up. He gave me a creepy smirk and began muttering homophobic slurs at me. I had enough of this bullshit, so I chucked my computer's keyboard at him and spit on his face. He began to twitch violently as everyone watched in confusion. He grabbed me by the neck and dug his thumbs into my throat. At that moment, the look in his eyes, it didn't even appear human. Finally, a student spoke up.
Get your fucking hands off of him.
Jeff let go of my neck immediately, the animalistic look leaving his eyes as he walked over to Chase and the two left the room. I spent the next week talking to the RA about the harassment I had been tolerating for way too long. Students had told me they had seen Jeff on campus waving a knife around and bragging about how he was going to slit my throat. And, to my surprise, I wasn't the only student to report Jeff for sexual and physical harassment. Jeff was one of the best programmers at the school, and because of this, most of the faculty turned a blind eye to his harassment. They would all say,
"Oh, Jeff, that's just him being weird."
I had enough of this school and its bullshit excuses for justifying death threats and assaults, so I spoke to the school one last time. It was then that I found out that I was being expelled for spitting on Jeff.
What do you mean? I never touched the guy. He grabbed me. He choked me and threatened to kill me.
I pleaded to the school counselor. She began rambling on about how Jeff was such a smart student and that I was taking things too seriously. Frustrated, I told her that I would rather bash my head against a wall than have to deal with the morons at this school. Suddenly, I heard a demanding voice addressing me. A police officer entered the room and immediately put me in handcuffs.
Okay, son, you've made a threat to endanger yourself. You have to come with us.
Panicking, I looked back at the counselor. Through my tears and utter shock, I could see that she was also crying. The next thing I know, I was driving to an industrial-looking building with the letters UPC displayed beside the door. I discovered quickly that this wasn't a jail or a hospital. It was basically a holding facility for the mentally ill, composed of only 2 rooms. UPC stood for Urgent Psychiatric Care. In reality though, there was no caring of these patients. I was assigned a reclining plastic-lined chair and a blanket which was lined up with dozens of other identical chairs in a single room. This would be where I sat, ate and slept for the next 2 weeks. No faculty members spoke to me for the first 2 days. I was given no context to what was happening to me or where I was, so I spent these first 2 days crying non-stop. Once I finally began to pull myself out of my hysteria on the second day, I noticed all the levels of mental illness around me, from the depressed to the violently insane. On my first night, the elderly blind woman next to me began to vomit undigested food profusely and was left covered in her own vomit for a good half hour before an inconvenienced nurse finally got off her cell phone and wheeled the woman away. I later discovered the man in the chair to my other side was a Crip gang member with obvious noose burns around his neck. A presumably homeless man would walk around talking about the devil. The nurses would completely ignore him, and sometimes I would hear him laughing at the patients. I awoke several nights to the sounds of screaming. For a long time, no one knew where I was. Eventually though, I was able to use a phone and quickly explain my situation to my parents. Towards the end of my time there, I had almost grown used to being woken to the sounds of screaming and could get back to sleep relatively easily. I sat in the same set of clothes for the entire time, rotting away in a chair, being laughed at by rude nurses as if I were an ape in a zoo. I probably smelled like an animal at that point too, considering I was too afraid to shower publicly, particularly after the previous events with Jeff. After some time, I was finally told I was going to be transferred to an actual hospital. On one of my last days in that room, I witnessed a wandering homeless man pull down his pants and he started masturbating into the face of another patient. The nurses tackled him to the ground, and soon after, I was transferred to a real hospital. After this, things were surprisingly calmer at the actual hospital. I was able to bathe, talk to the staff, and read for the next month while doctors attempted to get me into the right balance of antidepressants. After a month of being in actual hospital, I was deemed by a judge not to be a danger to myself or anyone else. And just like that, I was released and able to drive back east to be with my family. Over the next week, I received emails and phone calls from multiple people. The head of the Student Alliance informed me that Jeff and Chase had been receiving backlash from other students. They were also starting up an anti-bullying campaign. The school president called to apologize for the incident and offered me a refund for my unfinished semester. The school counselor and administration called to inform me of their intentions to sue should I tell anyone about the events that transpired. And for a year afterwards, I told no one. I still haven't told my family about the sexual harassment either. After 3 years, I'm finally moving on from the event. A few months back, I was fairly certain I actually saw Chase running an artist table at a local convention. He didn't notice me, thankfully. He had the same long stringy hair and miserable expression I can so vividly remember. Seeing his face doesn't bother me anymore though. In the end, I learned a lot about people, and sometimes the people we're forced to trust most don't deserve to be trusted at all.
Number 2.
This story might come across as your typical scary psych ward patient tale, but to this day, I've never encountered anyone else like this. I hope I never do. I admit, I've suffered with mental illness all of my life. I've been admitted to several psychiatric hospitals throughout the years, but I'm not the scary one in this story. There's a lot of stigma surrounding the mentally ill, but despite what a lot of people think, most people who suffer with psychological issues aren't dangerous. But the man I'm about to tell you is the exception. I'd managed to stay out of hospital for years, but in my early 20s, I had a bit of a breakdown and became very suicidal. I won't go into the details of why, but let's just say I've had a lot of trauma in my life, but those are perhaps scary tales for another time. I ended up being carried, yes, carried, by a very large, very patient cop into the ER after letting it slip to my doctor that I just wanted to end it all. I'm only 5 foot and around 98 pounds, so this guy picked me up very easily. The ward I was then transferred to was a very cliche psychiatric unit. For some reason I'll never understand, they make most psych wards cold and bright white with hard, unforgiving floors and mattresses that make it feel like you're sleeping on a slab of concrete. The food is terrible, which all certainly doesn't help one be less suicidal, and the only thing to do was to watch cable or play cards with the other patients. Thankfully, I ended up really connecting with a lot of other patients, particularly a man named Michael. I think it may have had something to do with us both being feisty redheads. Gingers tend to bond with each other because we can empathize with all the shots people like to take at us. Just because all the redheads I've ever met happen to be a little crazy doesn't mean anything though, right? Anyways, Michael and I were playing cards. We were playing a game called Speed, and we heard a nurse say we had a new patient coming in. Hesitantly, we both decided to take a peek to see who it was. It's important to know that, unfortunately, they don't always separate the more severely disturbed patients with the ones who are non-violent. They tend to just throw you all in one big pile, labeled the crazy pile, and I guess I just don't want to waste the energy thinking about the possible horrifying consequences of not caring. I'm not saying all hospitals and medical professionals are this callous towards the mentally ill, but unfortunately, there are some. That's one of the hardest things about being mentally ill, is that most people don't want to deal with you, and even go as far as thinking as you're a monster or a broken doll who would be thrown away and forgotten about. For the record though, there are a lot of very caring nurses, doctors, and others who make it their mission to help people like this and treat you with a lot of care and respect. This was not one of those hospitals though. Anyway, looking down the hallway, I felt my heart drop into my toes as I saw the new arrival. His appearance was as intense and disturbing as the look of pure hate and malice he was shooting everyone around him. He had long, greasy black hair that spilled just a little past his shoulders. He was bone thin everywhere except his stomach, which protruded out so much he looked at least 7 months pregnant. I swear he was male though. However, the most noticeable and unnerving thing about him were his claw-like nails that I'll never forget were painted bright blue. His eyes were also an icy blue that felt like they could pierce right through you. His hospital gown was barely holding onto his skeletal frame. I remember desperately trying to reconcile this man's presence in my head, but there was just no way. Even just at 20, I'd seen a lot of crazy people, but this guy was by far the most unsettling. I think even people in Walmart would look at this guy like, holy shit. Looking at Michael, I could tell he was freaking out pretty bad too. The reason behind this freaking out was because we'd both been there a few days and knew that this particular hospital barely monitored their patients, and this guy was going to just be set loose among us. Now, I know you shouldn't judge others based on their appearance, but his actions over the next few days really didn't help his creepy factor. He spent most of the day just wandering down the hallways and running one freaky claw-like nail against the sterile walls. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they make him cut his nails, as they could clearly be used as a weapon? The reason was he would completely lose it whenever they tried, and once again, this particular hospital just doesn't give a crap. When he wasn't doing this, he would just sit there and stare at the rest of us with a disturbingly, almost hungry look in his eyes. He wouldn't speak. He would just stare while clacking his nails on the arm of the chair. He would also wander into everyone else's room and just stand there in the middle of it and wait for someone to come in. When he did, he would just stare at them and put one of his skeletal fingers up to his lips to silence them before lunging towards them. I mean, this was totally something straight out of a horror movie, but I swear to you, it was real. I've learned that reality tends to be much more terrifying than anything Hollywood can come up with. Now, during all of this, I just did my best to avoid him, but one day I did something to bring a lot of attention to myself. This psych ward was unique. It had an old piano in the main room for patients to tinker with as they desired. My trade in life is music, although I'm mainly a vocalist. I can, however, memorize some decently complicated piano pieces. We were all so bored and miserable at where we were, so I figured music would be much more healing than cable TV. So, one evening, I decided to give the dusty old piano a shot. Everyone seemed really shocked when I just started playing and singing a lullaby I had written. I guess I'd never mentioned I could play before, so that probably contributed to the surprise. I felt really happy again for the first time in a long time when I saw how delighted the other patients and even the nurses were with my performance. They begged me to play everything I knew, and I happily obliged. The one bad thing though is when I finished, I noticed Mr. Blue Nails staring at me very intently. I now seemed to be very much the focus of his attention. I tried to shake it off, but I became very much more aware of his location, which turned out to be a very good thing. Later that night, I had to go to my room to use the bathroom. When I was finished, I casually opened the door, and of course, who was now standing right in my face? You guessed it, I'm sure. Mr. Blue Nails. To my horror, instead of putting his finger over his lips like he usually did, he did something much worse. He spoke. I say it was much worse because his voice was just as unstable as the rest of him. In a creepy, low whisper, he said,
"Sing for me."
Nope, yep, just no. Thankfully, being super tiny doesn't just mean you're easy to pick up, it also makes you very adept at dodging and slipping through small spaces. So, as he came at me, it actually wasn't too hard to duck under his arms and bolt from the room. I immediately ran over to Michael and proceeded to freak out for a minute. I told the nurses, and they just told me that he doesn't understand what proper boundaries are. I shot back that considering he was constantly trying to pounce on everyone like a jungled cat,
No shit, he has no boundary issues. Can you please pay a little more attention to him?
Also, I know as someone who also suffers with mental issues, I should be more sensitive to his condition. But I grew up in a tough environment, and I know the difference between someone who doesn't understand anything they're doing to someone with a violent intent in their eyes. Fortunately, just a day later, he was transferred to the state hospital after losing his temper about taking his medicine and trying to stab the nurse with a syringe. You can't refuse to take your meds in the psych ward. If you don't cooperate, they'll hold you down and eject them straight into you. Yeah, he didn't like that. I myself was released a day after he was, and I'm not sure whatever happened to Mr. Blue Nails, but I must admit, I have wondered about him sometimes. It's been several years since this happened, and I'm happy to say I'm doing a lot better now. I've been hospitalized again, but I've never encountered any other patient quite like him.
Number 1.
I used to work as an intern at a psych hospital in California a couple of years ago. I have many stories about my time there, but I'll start off with this one for now. I was going to school to study psychology and found a hospital with a great program to continue my studies. I had just finished orientation and was going to start my first day the next day. I was nervous but also extremely excited as I love psychology and people. I was assigned to the unit 210. This particular unit held 15 patients that had borderline personality disorder, bipolar, and/or schizophrenia. I unlocked the door to the unit and was immediately greeted by a couple of patients walking up and down the long hallway. My first greeting was from a man that shouted that he was going to rape and then decapitate me. Now, I'm not the most intimidating person. I'm a 5-foot petite part Asian girl that probably looked like I had no business being there. Being that I looked a bit timid, I had to shake it off like I didn't give a shit.
No, you won't do that.
Anyway, illegible scribbles and pentagrams covered the walls. It smelt of urine, and I can hear screaming down the hall. The doors of their rooms had those little windows you can peep in. Bare white halls, bare white beds, and no windows to the outside. The psychologist I was shadowing introduced me to the patients and nurses I would be working with. This one girl, let's call her Katie, came up to say hello and started making conversation with me. Naive me, assuming she was a fellow intern or volunteer because she was in regular clothes and seemed normal, I asked if she was an intern as well. This was a rookie mistake. I should have looked for her badge, which all staff members have. She smiled, looked at me straight in the eyes.
Yes.
I tell her I'm excited to be working with her. A few minutes later, Mary instructs me to gather the patients together for their art group. I ask her if I can go get Katie to help gather everyone. She says,
Of course. You will also be working close to Katie. Please, read her file after art group.
I'm thinking, file? Art group starts, and lo and behold, Katie, she's a patient. I later read her file, and she has schizophrenia with a long history of being a pathological liar. When Mary said I would be working close to her, that meant that I would be shadowing Katie one-on-one and recording her progress every day that I am working. I was in charge of making sure Katie was doing her chores, making her bed, tidying up her room, hygiene, attending her groups, and finishing her assignments. Besides her telling me that big fat lie, Katie came off as a really nice and sweet person. As we sat there, painting, she shared a bit of her life story and we had some laughs. She said,
Belle, I'm glad you're here. I've always wanted a sis and a friend. We even kind of look alike. I'm gonna draw you.
A couple of weeks of working there, all was great. One Tuesday, I came in to get Katie for her math lesson. I knocked on her door to her room and she excitedly emerged. I took a step back though, and my eyes widened. Her long waist-length black hair was cut into an A-line.
I had staff cut my hair into your style. Now we really look like sisters.
I didn't know what to say, but
looks good, Katie.
Then things took a turn from there. Katie's personality and mood started to fluctuate and change as time went on. She would tell me all these stories of us when we were younger.
Belle, remember that one time we were in kindergarten and we got in trouble together? It's crazy how long we've been friends. I could never get rid of you.
I would always try redirecting the conversation, and she would always say,
You still have that bad memory like you did when you were a child. You're so silly.
She became extremely attached to me and even jealous when I would talk to other patients, saying things like,
Stay away from Bella today. She has mono. Bella can't talk to you this week. She has laryngitis.
And the most dangerous one,
Bella doesn't like you.
So I won't give anyone else any attention. This caused patients to confront me as to why I didn't like them. One day, I poked my head into her room to make sure her bed was made. She was sitting on her neat bed facing the wall, sitting and staring so intently. I looked at her walls. My name was written everywhere. I notified staff immediately, and it was later cleaned up, but they shrugged it off. She said,
I just didn't want to forget you when you weren't here is all. They can wash you off the walls, but they can't wash you out of my mind.
Katie eventually went over the edge one day when she found out that I would have another patient, Chris, to tutor. She was so resentful and became really nasty towards me. She had all staff as well as patients calling her Belle. I explained to her that she would still be working with me, and she just snarled,
You're not Belle anymore. I am. I'll erase you. Go fuck Chris. You will lose your mind before you leave here.
A week or two went by without any incident. I had just finished my shift and was ready to go home for Thanksgiving weekend. I was walking down the empty long hallway out of the unit when Katie jumped out of nowhere and shoved me into one of the rooms that was supposed to be locked. The room with the bare white walls, the bare white bed and small peep window. I fell into the cold, hard ground into the room. I immediately jumped to get to the door, but she was on the other side pulling it. She was screaming that I will never leave and that she'll make sure of it.
Go lay in the bed. It's your bed now.
I push the emergency button on my keys that sets off the unit's alarm, but it doesn't go off. Unlocked doors and broken alarm button. Just my luck. I tell her to let go of the door, but she refused and shouted that I was the crazy one that belongs in there.
Where are the staff though?
We continue playing tug of war with the door for what felt like hours when Chris, my wonderful math student, came to rescue and shoved her out of the way from the door to let me out. The alarm finally went off and staff came rushing over. I was shaken up, but Katie had to be dragged away, all the while screaming,
I will get rid of you, Belle. I will wear your skin if I have to. I will be you soon, and you will be no more.
Katie was discharged to another hospital the following day. Things were quiet the next couple of days, and I was stripping Katie's bed to prepare for the next patient. A folded up paper, along with an eraser, fell out of her pillowcase. It was a graphite drawing of me she did during that first art group 7 months ago. I have never seen it before now. There was some eraser residue on it, and it was smudged on one side of my face. She was starting to erase it. Me. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. We've hit 200,000 subscribers, guys. Wow, I can't believe how quickly this channel is growing. Every day I wake up, it just seems like hundreds and hundreds of people are joining the Beehive. I see thousands of people just leaving likes, comments, watching the video, and interacting here on the channel. It's just amazing, guys, and 200,000 people. That's such a huge number. I can't even comprehend that. That's like more than any sporting arena here in Australia. That's just insane. Oh my gosh. You guys are just awesome. Thank you guys so much for your support. And thanks again to the Hive members as well that bravely shared their story for us all to hear. And for the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming, guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. And please do me a favor and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent so that I can just be above board with everything. And remember to tell me in the email if you'd like to remain anonymous, and also change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So 2 video genres I now am wanting to cover are still, one of them is the hacking stories, guys, so if you've got any of those particular stories, please send them through. And also, guys, I thought I'd open up a platform for social media stories again. I know you guys really enjoyed those stories previously before all the copyright stuff went down, so the social media stories can be anything from Facebook, Twitter, Omegle, Kik, Snapchat, dating apps, anything really, guys. So if you have a story that would fit under either of these genres, I'd love to hear from you. But remember, guys, even if you don't have this type of story, please continue to send your story in anyway, because I'd really love to hear it. And guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second gaming channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you mates in the next one.